What was your fuck this I'm out moment? I was unemployed and had a job interview for a cable installer position, a position advertised for $20 an hour, 40 plus hours a week, and benefits, so it seemed like a pretty good deal. I get to the interview and find out it's actually 2 interviews, a group interview followed by one-on-one interviews with the hiring manager in the group interview. HM explains that the position was actually minimum wage and commission. He also explains that we need to supply our own tools. He then tells us how they're in jobs and we have no choice over which ones we get right. Before the end of the group interview, one of the other guys asks if there were any other expenses we were responsible for, and HM tells us that we had to pay for our own gas, tires, and repairs on our rigged company van. I look out in the parking lot and saw all the vans looked like 20-year-old clapped out pieces of. As soon as HM went back to his office, I left. Some young woman and an old lady were arguing about stolen underwear in our communal laundry room. Young woman called for her out boyfriend, who came running in with a gun drawn screaming, "Noped right out," then moved out that weekend. I'm a middle school teacher, and it's also worth mentioning that I'm a very petite woman and most of my students are bigger than me. Many years ago, when I was considered one of the young and pretty teachers, I was walking down the hall, an 8th grade boy slapped me on the and mentioned my car's make and model, implying that he was going to wait for me in the parking lot. I immediately went to my principal, who told me that reporting the incident would reflect poorly on me, and I don't want a complaint like that in my file. I put in my resignation from that particular school the next day. The more I mention it, the more I realize that many teachers have similar experiences. Not really so much of this moment as confirmation of this. Senior software engineer role at a leading telecom in USA. One of 3 new devs to join the team. Manager decided it would be best to rotate support between the 3 newbies issues every night, sometimes all night. Huge pressure to work 60+ hour weeks with totally unrealistic goals. After a few months I realized this wasn't just a crunch period, this was going to be all the time. After giving notice, manager set me down and told a story of how I'd have to decide what was important and take life seriously. His example was getting a call to come back to the office for an emergency and handing his 2-year-old daughter off to a neighbor he didn't know so he could come work all night. Yeah, that. Then my last day, the VP pulls the team together and absolutely rips into this guy for taking 20 minutes to support an issue, since he was driving home at the time and couldn't log in immediately when called. That recently I was hired by a company to be a foreman. My job was laid out in my interview as follows: plant maintenance and welding. I would run a crew of 4 guys and do odd jobs at a ratto plant 10 miles from my house. This is what I have done for other various companies for the last 15 years. After taking the job, they asked me to help another foreman doing the same thing at a different ratto plant about 80 miles away. I agreed as it was for a few days. Fast forward 3 weeks, I'm still driving 160 miles a day and we have been doing concrete and asphalt prep for a week. Not my vocation. The boss casually mentioned at about 2 in the afternoon that we had to finish a particular part of the project before we left and that we would be there at least till 8 PM. I told him I couldn't work late on short notice because I had plans and still had to drive home. He said, "If you don't pick up the pace you will be leaving earlier than that." I told him I agreed, and since this wasn't the job I was hired for, that I was done. He replied with "See ya," and I said probably not. I was hired as a temp. On day 91 I was told that they in fact didn't have to hire me after 90 days and they were gonna keep me on as a temp. I clocked out for lunch and never went back. Some promoter literally gave me $80 to go into his Vegas with my friends. Said he would throw in the limo and VIP package if we tipped the driver because his other reservation cancelled. When we got there, we got different color wristbands than other people and were told we could only leave their taxi. When we left, that was our only option. One friend tried to leave and the bouncer wouldn't let him out. He came back and told us what was up. Nothing was adding up. So we booked it out of the fire exit and down the street. That was how I got paid $80 to go. Pretty sure we were going to get robbed when we left and would probably have been. I was working as a postie. Normally when a postie gets sick, the other posties have to cover his route. There were 7 of us so it was annoying, but not too bad. I'd been there for a couple of years and had covered other people's sick days several times. Anyway, I got really sick, the sickest I'd been in my life up till that time. Had the flu, but it wound up making me look grey and shrunken, and I got a migraine. Finally went back to work. I'd had 3 days off. Piles of mail were waiting for me. I don't know if they delivered any of it, maybe they did, but there were huge piles waiting for me and I was still sick. I only went back in because I was worried about the workload on them. I gave my notice, finished the week and then quit. I worked at Youth Market when I was in college. I really needed the job. I literally had empty cabinets and only one shelf of food in the fridge on a regular basis. I had been working weekday evenings only for a couple of months, but picked up a Saturday shift. I was helping a Tomer and the owner walked up and interrupted our conversation. "Is that your yellow car in parking lot?" Me, "Yes." With the most demeaning tone. "On weekends, our parking lot is reserved for Tomers only. If you value your job, you will go punch out, move your car to the lot across the street, and never park in the lot again." I was astonished. I had full-time jobs every summer since I was 15. I picked up holiday jobs. I had a lot of working experience. I had never been talked to like this by any coworker or boss before, particularly in front of a Tomer. I told her I was not aware of the parking rules since I always worked weekdays, took off my apron, handed it to her, and said I will be punching out, but not punching back in. I quit. I told the Tomer I was sorry I was not able to finish helping him and walked out. I really needed the job, but was so I could not stand the idea of working there. My supervisor called me that afternoon and tried to get me to come back, but I just couldn't. I was about 17 and lived in a rural area, used to hitchhike everywhere. One day I'm in the back of a car. Two guys up front, they are talking kinda quiet. After a minute or two I hear one say back, quote, "Okay, but this time we'll go somewhere else." Then he looks in the mirror at me. I looked away out the window, propping my pants. As we went through a village we had to stop at a junction and I blurted something about a friend living nearby and I opened that door and ran, probably nothing in it, but I still get chills remembering it. I was working a particularly awful nursing home as a CNA. I was bullied by some of the other CNAs as well as one terrible nurse. I put up with it for a year and put in my 2W notice. I only told management, not the other staff. On my second to last day there, that nurse decided to scream in my face about some imaginary infraction. About an hour later I learned that the company that had bought the facility earlier in the year had decided anyone who'd been working there less than a year on the sale date would not get any vacation days. I'd also only be getting half my sick days paid out. When I quit, that meant 2.5 days of pay, and I learned that if I didn't complete my 2 weeks of notice, I'd forfeit those 2.5 days. I realized 2.5 days of pay wasn't worth the abuse I was having to endure, and I told her Don at the end of that day that I was never coming back. She tried to talk me into it, but it didn't work. So that's my "fuck this, I'm out" story. I was working as a network engineer, and due to mismanagement by owner, who took lavish trips every 3 months with family and kids friends, he had a payroll shortfall. His solution was to reduce my medical benefit, which included my family, to just me, then 3 months later reducing my salary by 30%. When he told me, he also said that he expects me to work 50 to 60 hours a week until profits improve. Then said, "What do you think?" I said, "I quit." I worked for him 13 years. He has called many times to get me to help with special projects for his clients. I have politely refused. I was in my mid-20s, working myself to absolute death in a small town office supply store. I mean, the amount of work I was doing as a department specialist was staggering. I was basically working and running half the store myself, so the store manager didn't have to, while the assistant manager above me was doing nothing but taking a paycheck, stealing digital cameras, and lying about being a trained ninja, and staff was kept to a minimum to make store numbers look better. I was just straight up in retail. It's also important to note that my store manager was an arrogant, incapable to steps from heart failure, who had been shunted to that small town store just to get him out of the way. Twice they'd had to remove him for a while, based on employee and Tomer complaints. some of them in the vein of harassment. I don't know how he managed to keep his job. Anyway, one day, he comes up to me. He's concerned about my attitude. Customers love you, you know what you're doing. You do great work, but as soon as you're not talking to a Toma, your whole attitude changes. You never speak to me with respect or enthusiasm. I can see on your face that you don't want to be here. I mean, look at me. If you just improved your attitude and wanted to be here, you could be me in a couple years. Think about it. So I didn't that night. I went home, applied to go back to school, and quit my job the next day. I was roofing and getting paid by the day. After a few months I asked to get paid piecework. My pay for that week was about double, and the boss said he had to put me back to daily rate next week. I said goodbye and started my own business. I was at a party. It was a bunch of suburban teenagers like myself at the time. There was this dude I didn't recognize walking around and acting super hard. Even though he was really scrawny, he finally got to me and was like, "Yo, I got AK-47s for sale. You want one?" I was like, "Dude, shut up. You ain't got." He takes me out to his car and opens the trunk. It is full of guns piled on top of one another. Handguns, alt rifles, shotguns, you name it. I ended up sneaking out, hopping in my car and heading home. This dude ended up being an on-foot soldier type for a gang out of the nearest big city. He got arrested a few days later when he got stopped for speeding. The cops searched his car and found the guns. He was only 16. I recently quit my job as a call center worker after 4 years. For background, I worked in Toma services for a popular retailer in the UK during lockdown. When their stores were closed, we had increased sales from online, which also means we got increased call volumes. I busted my off to ensure that Tomas were happy with their purchases and resolved any issues they had to the best I could. One day, we got an email from RCA saying that even though we had the highest volume of online sales, we still would not be able to get a bonus due to the virus affecting the business as a whole. I only ever had a bonus once when I was working there, and I'm used to not getting a bonus. What made me was that we got absolutely nothing in return. Not a pay increase, not extra holidays, not a wren of gratitude, and not even a thank you letter for all the hard work. We also found out a couple days later via the mainstream news that the bigwigs at my company all got a pay rise. At this point, myself and a few other people went fuck this, and we all handed our badges at reception and left. I got a new job a week later without any problem and feel even better as a person. This was the first time ever in my life I walked out of a job in anger. Recently worked for a dentist who was committing all kinds of insurance fraud. Now I'm as honest as they come, and this wasn't okay with me, especially knowing my name would be on some of the correspondence. Add to that, this guy was a complete. He thought nothing of berating me in front of patients. I've been doing what I do for a lot longer than him, and that kind of disrespect I won't tolerate. I left for lunch, sent a text saying I was done, and I went home. Was in a forest with a few friends, having some fun being oblivious kids. We had just crossed a small river with a large incline on both sides. We go to the other side and started to walk. I looked at a tree and stopped. I still have no clue what made me feel like stopping. A guy in full grey clothes stepped out from behind the tree and pulled what looked like a gun from his back. For people that may ask, it was just a handgun. Safe to say me and my friends ran as fast as we could without looking back through the forest, crossing the river without caring about the makeshift bridge we built, and ran straight through. When we got out I realized how bad that could have been. Me and my brother were chilling outside a 7-Eleven talking to a homeless guy, and he offered to take us into an alley and let us try some. Still not sure if he wanted to rob us, let us try his, or let us try his. Went with a friend to visit his dad and look for possible jobs in Chicago. While my friend was out job-ting the third day, his dad asked if I wanted to go to a bar with him. Sure. So we go to this hole in the wall of a bar, legit down and alley and backdoor style. Entered this dark small room with a 6-foot bar. I'm already questioning whether I should have stayed or left, but here comes the kicker. We get a couple beers from the bartender, who was super nice guy. Nothing weird about him until his question, joining or viewing. My friend's dad and smiled and smacked my back and said just viewing. The guy walks us over to another door and opens it, leading us into a much larger room. And if you haven't guessed it yet, there were about 15 people in the middle of an pure exhibition that I was not prepared for at 12:30 p.m. On a Tuesday. This I'm out caught an Uber back and everything. When 8th graders had me crying into my pillow every night and drinking wine every time I quit teaching and joined the lab.